Good morning, everybody. We are live. We are set to go. Welcome to Place and Resources, Best Committee on Dorset Council. Apologies for absence.
Chairman, apologies from Councillor Fry.
Thank you. I have been abandoned by my Vice Chairman, but we're going to get through this somehow. Moving on to declarations of interest. Does anybody have any? I see none. Chairman's update. I don't have one, but we can talk about strictly if you like. Public participation. We have no questions. We are rattling through this. Questions from members. We don't have any. So we're going to go straight to item 7. And the lovely Dawn Adams is going to be presenting this. I did that. There was none. I'm sorry, but my Democratic Services officer hasn't had coffee this morning. So, we are on item 7, fees and charges policy. This is going to be presented by Dawn Adams. Oh, did you have a declaration?
No. Wanted to say something about the minutes, if I may.
I've missed those. I'm so sorry. I'll come back to it. Right, pretend that hadn't happened. Minutes of the last meeting, 6th of October 22. Does anybody have any comments? Maria?
I just wanted to ask a question about the minutes. I can't find the answers to my questions on the exempt item. And, you know, I don't consider it a true record if they're not on there. Thank you.
Thank you. I would imagine that's because these are in the public domain. So therefore your question, but could I let Lindsay come in on this?
Yes, it's exactly that, because you submitted questions in respect of an exempt item. The questions and the answers were all exempt, and therefore they can't be included within the public minutes.
I thought the public couldn't...
Okay, sorry, Maria. Did you want to come back?
The public could see the minutes in ModGov.
They are always on the public website, so if you go into councillors and committee... If you go into councillors and committee on the main Dorset Council website, you can go into every agenda, all the minutes that have been published, the attendance and everything. You can see that on the main website. Lindsay wants to come back.
I mean, just to say that the minutes are the public record of the meeting, therefore the information that in there is got to be public. So if anything's exempt, it can't be within those minutes. I mean, I did send you a response to the questions, but they have to be outside of the public set of minutes.
Thank you very much. Right, we're moving on to item 7, our fees and charges policy. May I introduce...
Point of order. With exempt minutes, surely they should be available for inspection by those allowed to see the exempt minutes. There should be a record of what happened under exempt business, that even if it is still exempt.
Lindsay, is this something you can take a look at and advise, please?
I can certainly take a look at it. I mean, we don't generally produce exempt minutes. There was reference in the public minutes to the fact that questions were asked by a number of members.
Can I just come back? Well, I just feel very uncomfortable about that. That locally we're having a meeting and we can't reflect back on the minutes. So I don't consider it a true record.
Councillor Jesperson.
I think we've very helpfully stumbled into something that's a bit beyond the remit of this committee. Can I suggest that we send this back via Lindsay to get some proper information and note that the question has been raised about exempt minutes and whether, and it's not very impressive that none of us seem to know whether there are. In fact, no, Lindsay knows, but none of us members seem to know whether there are exempt minutes. So a bit of tidying up, I think, in another place is called for. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a good idea. Lindsay, will you take that back and perhaps get a note out to all members of this committee and perhaps a note out to all members so overall actually about what happens on exempt item minutes? So can I just double check? I am signing the minutes as they are from the last meeting, the 6th of October. Thank you. Dawn, you've been waiting patiently to speak, but I believe that Aidan is going to start this off and then you'll carry on. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. So I'm Aidan Dunn. I'm the Exec Director for Corporate Development and Chief Finance Officer. So this is hopefully a very interesting topic and a really useful piece of policy development that we're asking, bringing in front of the committee. I just wanted to give it a bit of context to start off with. So the week before last, the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee looked at the commercial transformation programme, so trying to bring together the commercial aspects of the council and raise our ambitions in that regard. And there are 4 aspects that we talked to the scrutiny committee about, and they are about the council trying to behave in a more business-like way, secondly, to become more business-friendly, thirdly, to commission as one council, and fourth is about generating income. And as we've gone through the transformation programme, we're sort of acutely aware that there's room for improvement around generating income, and hence bringing it to the overview committee today. What we do as an organisation at the moment is we've got a range of charges for about, at our latest stock take, around about 1,500 different items. So that's ranging from charging for a dropped curb through to a library fine, charging for car parking, through to care charges. So there's a whole variety of charging going on. And what we haven't had before is, first of all, a central register of what those charges are. But more importantly, we haven't had a single standard policy as Dorset Council of how we determine those charges. And so what Dawn has been doing with her team is doing that stock take across the council, developing a policy, and that policy is in draft in front of you today and is for you to get your teeth into to really explore and understand. What we're hoping to do is, depending on how this committee goes, is to then take it with a recommendation from here to the January Cabinet, which is the budget setting Cabinet. So then we've got a very clear charging policy accompanied by a schedule of those 1,500 or so items. So this is a crucial part of the development of that policy. So if I could now hand over to Dawn to talk us through the work that she's been doing.
Thank you, Aidan. Okay, I'm Dawn Adams, Service Manager for Commercial and Procurement, and I'm just going to do a small presentation about fees and charges policy. Right, we have, as Aidan said, we've got a diverse range of charges, diverse range of users from local organisations to individual residents. And we actually have different types of fees and charges across different services. And they actually run through 3 types. The statutory services, these are services that we have to provide by the government, and the fees and charges set nationally. A good example is planning charges. Then we have what non-statutory we call discretionary services. These services, we don't have to provide these services, but we do, and because it's services we provide, it's not statutory, we set the fees and charges ourselves, but we mustn't not generate a surplus, that's a profit on these charges. That we're not allowed to do, that's not against the law. And then if we've got commercially trading discretionary services. These are actually services if we set up a local trading company, for example, in which case we can generate a profit, we set our charges, and how we set those charges if we was in a trading activity, we'd look at our market. So it'd be different than discretionary or statutory. So that's the 3 types of charges we have. Okay, and this is an indication of the income we get for fees and charges that we can see from 2021 and the actual and what was looking like now. So that's again, and that's broken down per directorate. So it's quite a significant amount of money there we have on fees and charges. So I'm coming to why I have a policy. There's always pressure on our budget. So at the current time, we have particular pressure due to the deflationary, and we know it's actually a market crisis around that. So it's important we have a policy approach, that we actually are consistent and we have a method set of how we set our fees and charges, that we understand where those fees and charges are and how we set them, and to make sure we've got a good relationship and understanding between price and cost. You know, how much does it cost to deliver it and what is the price that we are charging, to understand we actually know that and it's transparent to us and we have some consistency. So the policy is going to set out the fees and charges are corporately led, and as are supporting the business areas concerned. There's a central record of the fees and charges, and there's a clear roles and responsibility on the management of these, and ensure that we do have an annual review of the charges, and we actually aimed for cost recovery where possible. And if it's not full cost recovery, which I cover quite a bit in the policy, we know why we're not doing full cost recovery, and that's been agreed. We've got full understanding why we're actually discounting those charges, and again, to make sure we have a consistent approach around that as well. And this supports our corporate led, which actually supports members' drive for us to be more commerciality. And actually, again, I keep emphasising we've got to be consistent how we do it in our approach. So the key policy objectives are actually the fees and charges for service and income generating activities will be they're supporting the council's priorities. And ensure that we actually, as I said, we do actually review them annually by each directorate and with finance and commercial part of the budget setting process. And that's what we're doing at the moment. We're actually looking at all our fees and charges and preparing for the budget setting. I'll need to actually understand the full cost of delivery is calculated and documented, so we know how that cost is made up, to ensure that, again, we understand that where those charges are coming from, how we make up those charges, so there's always opportunity to be more efficient and actually generate more income from the service, or understand where that income is coming from. The fees and charges come in commercial services should be full cost recovery, except if it's not appropriate to do so. This may be services that is actually preventive services, or actually services that we're supporting to vulnerable groups. So it's important, we want those people to have those services, so we may have those discounted to ensure that they don't go into a service more complex later. But at the point of the policy and how the charges, we understand the reason why we're doing that, and it is completely transparent. And obviously there's some charges we just can't part because they're actually statutory and the government prevents us to do so. But as I say, if we're not going to apply full cost recovery, we make sure that the policy sets, that's got to be agreed by the relevant executive director and along with the Section 151 officer. So we're establishing a central schedule. As Aidan said, a huge amount of lines of charges we found, and it's the first time we've had a central record. So we actually know to ensure that we know what charges are statutory, we know what charges are discretionary. So it's quite clear to us what the different types are. And again, if it's discretionary, have we discounted it and record of the reason why? So this schedule template is actually, we've got it now, we've actually developed it, it's literally going around business areas as we speak, to ensure that what's our charges now, what is the uplift is going to be, and actually understand, and if not, why not? So I keep saying, so the schedule will be there with description of the charge, whether it's discretionary, statutory, whether what is a new cost, and whether the charge is full cost recovery. So that will be fully transparent and on a corporate way for us to see. So this is a democratic process so far. So we've made a consultation with ELT. We went to Anwick today, we're at the overview, and then we'll be going to January in the Cabinet part of the budget strategy. So that's where we are currently.
Thank you very much. How long did it take you to find all 1,500? Are you still finding more?
The finance colleagues literally trawling through, I was quite amazed. But this is actually, as Aidan said, us coming back to the council. We'd have liked to have done it earlier, but something happened the last couple of years, prevented us.
It's been a challenge. Okay, we are asked to look at the policy and make any comments. So I'll open this up. Who would like to start?
Thank you for the presentation. Very good. My questions are about inflation, which is very topical. And I just wondered, on page 44, it says assumption all fees and charges will be increased each year based on a reasonable level of inflation. What is a reasonable level of inflation? Thank you.
Reasonable, yes. I'll give you an example for going through our current budget setting process. And for example, at the moment, we don't know what the level of inflation to anticipate in our budgets for next financial year. If we look at the Bank of England forecasts, it's somewhere between 12% and -2% is their forecast for next year. So our current planning assumption today for the average inflation next year of costs is 6%. So we're assuming, on average, the costs of our contracts, the demand, the pressure they're experiencing, would be about 6%. We've also assumed, in terms of our income, that our prices, on average, will go up by 5%. So we've had to take a judgment, and that's today's judgment building into the budget assumption. I do stress it's on average, and this whole policy is about drawing the distinction between, for those things that we try and keep price, let's put it at 5%, but others might go up with the market, others we might deliberately keep low.
Thank you. Did you want to come back? Yes.
Yeah? Sure. Shall I turn it off? Oops. Can you hear me? Yep. So is 6% considered reasonable? And could that change every year? Could you define perhaps in 3 years' time that inflation would be different to 6%? I just want to know if that is what you consider as reasonable. Thank you.
So that's what we consider reasonable for the circumstances for this year. It changes every single year. So as part of our budget setting process, we have to sort of make assumptions. So 2 years ago, I think it was around about 1%. And this current year, I think we sort of built it in about 2%. Given where we are in the economic cycle, 6% seems reasonable. But through the budget setting process, that final test of reasonableness is actually, it goes through the scrutiny committees and then on to Cabinet as part of the budget setting process. So it's a judgment that we take every year.
Thank you. Councillor Jesperson.
Not to interrupt, I know you've got other points, but just on this same point. Thank you for that explanation, which I understood. I don't think that the word reasonable would be interpreted by the ordinary people as meaning that. I think that's the problem. What you've just described is a carefully considered rate of inflation, or a rate of inflation considered in the context of the overall budget, or something like that. Reasonable doesn't cover it. It's not reasonable to the ordinary person in the street means not too high for people to bear, and we don't mean that at all. We mean reasonable as in reasoned, carefully considered. I think that would help. Say what we mean, because we don't mean reasonable.
Yep. Did you have another comment, Councillor Rowe? Sorry.
Yes, thank you. I just wondered about when charges could be increased above inflation. That concerns me.
That must come down to the level of cost involved. Aidan?
Yes. So, and in a way, this is at the very heart of the policy. So there are, as Dawn says, some things that the price will change because it's nationally mandated. Others, we've got an area of discretion. And as part of that area of discretion, some of it is about market forces. So a classic example, I think, is probably car parking charges, as we've looked at over the last year or two, looking at so some of the increases in car parking charges have been above inflation as we've gone through this harmonisation process and taking account of seasonality and taking account of demand. So what this policy tries to do is draw a distinction between those areas where we have got discretion and there's a degree of market determination, as opposed to merely saying the price goes up with inflation and sort of keep it locked there. So hence this is, I think it's sort of a surprisingly complex policy for a fairly straightforward issue. And I mean that kind of, the more we get into the detail of it, the more complex it gets.
Do we have any mechanism by which, if prices are perhaps looking to rise over and above a certain percentage, it can just have a quick look either through scrutiny or through any form of member involvement at all? Is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a degree of proportionality, with 1,500 charges. And yet those bigger issues, car parking once again being a really good example of that, where it's something that affects huge numbers of residents, that feels like a policy that does need to be reviewed by the scrutiny and cabinet process. I think one of the things that we've got in this policy is that there's room for manoeuvre. So there's one of the principles is making sure that we cover the costs of providing that service. But on occasion, there are times where we deliberately and consciously undercharge. So an example, if I could give an example, it's one we touched on in scrutiny last week, is charges to schools for services. So we as an organisation, we sell payroll services and HR advice and that sort of thing. So we generally try and charge the full cost recovery. But in some of those products that we sell, we consciously undercharge and thus, in effect, subsidise the service, because we know that what we want the schools to do is concentrate on educating the children of Dorset, not going through a tendering exercise and comparing prices and that sort of thing. And we know that they wouldn't be able to get the service they need at the level they can afford. So that's a good example of where we consciously and deliberately undercharge or under full cost recover. What this policy is saying is, let's do it consciously rather than just in a sort of a discreetly. So let's bring it out into the forefront and track it in the schedule. And we're trying to bring that consistency that Dawn talks about.
Thank you. Who else would like to come in? Councillor Jesperson?
Thank you very much. Just a couple of points, but the first one links directly to that point that you've just made about the deliberate decision to undercharge or to not charge full cost recovery. In the report, in paragraph 1.4, the reference is there to this decision will be taken with reference to the executive director and the 151 officer. Could I request, please, that it's also the portfolio holder? There should be some member input into those decisions. Not that you're going to be taking wrong decisions, but properly there should be member and the portfolio holder of the relevant and I'm not sure if there are any other places where we've referenced who's taking decisions, but if there are others, could we include member input into that one? The second point I wanted to make, if I may, while I've got the microphone, as it were, in the introduction, where we explain very nicely why we charge for services and so on. I didn't see any mention of one of the reasons why we charge is because the officers of the council are very skilled and highly trained professionals whose skills are very valued. And it would be quite nice to make that explicit. I think our officers would like to see that, just a sentence in there, crediting the fact that what we're selling is very high value. That it would also be helpful, I'm thinking, in terms of we want to be the employer of choice. People looking whether they'd like to come and bring their professional skills to Dorset would like to see that sort of thing referenced in our policies. So just slip that in there somewhere. my third point was, and I can't now find where I found a glancing reference to this, but it is a substantive point that I quite like to explore, about the position we take with regard to people paying fees, subsidising the people who don't pay fees. So we have fees being charged at full cost recovery and a fully commercial rate. What I'm not sure I'm very comfortable with on top of that is any suggestion that those people who are paying that fee might be paying above the full commercial rate or above full cost of recovery because we need to subsidise people who don't pay. I'm not sure that I think that's wrong. I just would quite like to explore whether that's something we do. I know in adult social care it's absolutely fundamental, so I'm kind of parking that because that's a slightly bigger question. But do we do it in any of our other fees and charges?
Thank you. I know I recall seeing in here that you can't be seen to be making a profit on a particular charge. Do you want to come back in on this, Dawn or Aidan?
Yes, that's right. So no, we shouldn't be subsidising doing what you said really, because when your fees and charges it's got full cost recovery, you can't make a profit. So there's no extra to pay for subsidise somebody else.
Yes, but it wouldn't be so it wouldn't be a profit if you were because it's a profit if you take it. So car park can make a surplus, but it's not considered a profit and if it's ploughed back into car parking and highways. So the question of profit is different than you can make a margin that you can then use within the given the legal constraints, can't you? So I'm just thinking in terms of. I mean, car parking is a good example. Are we comfortable with the fact that we're going to be charging people using our car parks who pay more because they have to subsidise the people who don't pay? I just would like it made explicit. I don't know that I don't know that I think that's a wrong thing to do. I just think the policy should be clear about whether that's what we do as a council.
I think you might have opened a little can of worms there, because I think what you're looking at is the whole service category of that one particular charge rather than that individual charge. And as far as I see it, you can't make a profit on that individual charge, but what you're looking for is, are we able to make a surplus to cover others who may be applying under that particular charge category? Oh, Aidan, did you want to come in, or do you think we should go for strong coffee immediately?
This is one of those moments where I wish we were doing it virtually and that I had an internet failure. Or so I think this is. I really would welcome other members' views on this as well. So I think there's a subtlety between car parking, which is. So the people who use the car park pay, so that if you use the service, you pay for it in that context. And you're right that the income generated can only be spent on highways and in the transport area. So in a way, car users are, in many ways, the money's being recycled into the roads, but it also goes into public transport as well. Some of it goes into public transport. So there's an example there. What I was racking my brain on is the element of, are there some areas where we charge some residents a higher price than other residents and have a degree of cross-subsidy? So you're right, the example of the care market operates in that way, but I'm not sure if there's any other charges that I can think of. Whether we want to is another matter. So I haven't got the answer, but I'm happy, I'd really welcome some other views, actually.
Councillor Jesperson, I can see you're itching to come back in.
Just to say that's helpful. Can we just note this in passing? And because what I'm basically saying is, if we are doing, and you described exactly, cross-subsidising by charging one service user slightly over the odds to subsidise another user of that same service, if we're doing that, I want us to be doing it knowingly and having thought it through and taken a decision that we're comfortable with that, rather than just, oh, I didn't realise that, you know. So we're going to start using, what should I say, using, have two prices for the garden waste, which we don't have. But if we were, so garden waste is cheaper for pensioners. Well, I'm happy with that. I'm a pensioner. But if we were to go that route, could we do it knowingly? That's all I'm saying. So let's not, you know, that's...
Look at our policy under agreed discounts. I think that's quite clearly stated. Are you happy with that? Lovely. Good, good. Councillor Coombs.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to refer to page 33 of the policy, and it's the first bullet point. In general, fees and charges income from discretionary services should recover the full cost of delivery, except where it is not appropriate to do so. For example, where services provide support to service users that helps prevent the need to access more costly or complex services later. Therefore, it is in the interest of the Council not to apply full cost recovery, or it is prevented by government legislation to do so. I have no issue with those at all. However, my concern is that the policy perhaps needs a little more nuance, because we've just heard that we've got over 1,500 different types of fees and charges. They are not prevented by government legislation, and they are not purely for a service that may lead to more complex services. There's a whole raft of other things in between, and I think, for example, joint use agreements and so on. And what I would like to see in the policy is just something that reflects the nuance, that it's not A or B, but there's a whole continuum of different things. And what I don't want is someone a few years down the line is to say, well, this is what the policy says, it's silent on that, therefore we can't do that. I just want to make sure that we are aware of the whole different range of things that we charge for in different ways, so that we don't end up, tripping over ourselves because we missed it. It's just about the nuancing of the words. I have spoken to the director before the meeting, and he does understand the full detail behind what I'm saying, but I just thought I'd ask that we get that done.
These, what you're referring to is our sort of the notes that we're looking at, but that's not necessarily in the actual policy itself. Do you feel that there should be something in the policy, Aidan or Dawn?
I absolutely agree with that. And one of the 1,500 things, or one of the things that we don't charge for example, is smoking cessation service. So I think technically we could charge for that, but it's we know that that's a really important and powerful preventative service. So it's a classic example. So what this policy is trying to do is bring everything together and put a spotlight on it and make sure that we consciously make decisions. What it's not trying to do is a draconian, we will charge X for it. And I think the point's well made that we just need to nuance that more clearly to make sure that we don't lose some of the really special stuff that Dorset does just by imposing a policy upon it. What we're trying to do is consciously take well-judged decisions rather than casually sort of do things. So we'll work on some wording and we can have a conversation outside here just to finalise that.
Just pop the word holistic in, that should do it. Lovely. Councillor Alford, you haven't spoken yet, and I'm just aghast. Would you like to speak?
Thank you. I'll be delighted to speak. And perhaps I will start with that last remark from Aidan and Dawn, which is, we're moving to a new policy, and clearly there may well be a transition stage for some services, because otherwise the effect of the new policy might be so great that it would cause so much disturbance that we wouldn't like the end consequences. So I think that is something well worth taking into consideration. I would say, referring to Sherry's point, that I fundamentally disagree with the idea of cross-subsidy. If in the very rare case, that cross-subsidy can be justified, it needs to be for short term, it needs to be for a specific policy purpose, and not the start of some new way of altering the results of the formula. So I think we do need to approach that sort of argument with a degree of care. The substantive point I really want to talk about is paragraph 7.1 on page 34. And it starts off by saying the initial draft of the EIA. I wonder, first of all, when the final version of the EIA will be completed. Well, I would like an answer before going on to point 2. All right, well, I will start point 2. We have, in that paragraph, we say, let me find it. Yes, how the fees and charges are set and monitored will have a positive impact to vulnerable groups, etc. It's not at all obvious to me why that would make any difference. So if there is a rationale that supports that statement, I'd be interested to hear it.
Thank you very much. Would you like to come back, Dawn?
Quality impact assessment is still in draft, waiting for feedback from our quality officer on there. But on the initial feedback, they felt it is a positive impact because we'll have a policy, we'll have consistency, we'll have transparency on why we're doing fees and charges and why, whether they're discounted or not. At the moment, we haven't got that transparency. So anything we do that's more transparent is going to have a positive impact to our residents, because we know what we're doing. We know why we're charging and what that charges is. So it's only going to have a positive impact. At the moment, we can't explain necessarily how we came to our fees and charges on our big list in one central place. So it's everything we're going to be doing around this is going to have a positive impact because we know why we're discounting, we know why we're doing full cost recovery, and we know what those type of service users are and the take-up from it. So it's going to be positive.
Thank you. Did you want to come back?
Yes, I understand that to a certain extent. But if I think about people who are vulnerable, we're talking about the cost of living crisis, etc., etc. People are very concerned about their own situation, and the transparency of the council doesn't really mean much to them. And so it makes sense if you are able to say that because we've got this supporting framework which justifies our pricing system and method, that we're in a better position to have the conversation with vulnerable groups about why we charge particular amounts rather than other amounts. So I can see it in terms of the way you would want to have the conversation, which I think is a slightly different way of thinking about it than is said in this report. I think there was something else I was going to say, but it's gone.
Can I come back to your earlier point on cross-subsidisation and just test the mechanisms that we're proposing through this policy? So the general policy is we'll charge full cost recovery unless there's a good reason not to, and our mechanism to decide what the good reason or not to is the manager who's got the reason trying to convince myself and the portfolio holder. So that's the mechanism. If there was to be cross-subsidy, that's the mechanism. It would go from manager to Section 151 officer in conjunction with the portfolio holder. Do you think that's enough in terms of checks and balances within the organisation? Or given the strength of feeling you have on cross-subsidy, would you kind of feel that actually it should go a bit further within the council. So just a question to test the policy.
Tony.
I'm going to be awkward and answer a slightly different question. The reason is that I come back to the sentence here which uses the word monitored, and we don't mention, for example, the scrutiny committee at all. And I think that there is a justification for having a policy which says that certainly after the first year, scrutiny ought to just test how it's been working. And I've not seen that reference to something like that in this paper. So when it comes to the question you are asking about a review after the event of cross-subsidy decisions, then that can be taken into account with other scrutiny work that a scrutiny committee might want to do.
If I could actually go back about the scrutiny, part of the commercialisation paper that went to scrutiny last week, the week before, and through, I had a conversation with Councillor Bartlett about the fees and charges policy. Obviously, that this is policies going forward. Scrutiny looks backwards, as I was described by Democratics. But he is keen at some point to actually look at the policy, look how we're actually managing live our scheduled fees and charges and the mechanisms that are we doing what we said we'd do followed by the policy in live for doing our charge. So he's very keen to actually have that discussion.
I think especially actually if you could then just drill into where subsidies have taken place, why they've taken place and what the decision making was behind that process. Are you happy with that? Marvellous. Anybody else like to come in at this point? I've got a little question.
I was just going to directly answer the question that Aidan asked, having raised it, with the proviso that with the conditionality that we've just talked about, scrutiny after the event. I mean, I have to say, I think what you outlined, that would make me happy. We don't want to set up a massive bureaucracy. This is a decision that wise people can make really quite quickly. So yes, the answer to your question does that sound satisfactory as a mechanism? I think it does. We can always come back to it if something went horribly wrong, but nothing will.
We have to trust our officers. Councillor Tarr.
Just wanted to make some useful suggestions which might be taken up by the people who run this outfit. And whether it's, I saw you, but I would like to say that car parking is quite close to my heart because I'm responsible for 12 parishes where they come into Dorset to market or to come shopping. And we want to welcome them into Dorset. We want to make sure they do come into Dorset. We want to make sure that they come to our shops and our entertainment and all the rest of it. So we don't want to discourage them. But I have had a number of letters and phone calls from residents, elderly residents, who can't manage the computer applications and the non-monetary payments, and they're outraged by the amount they're going to be charged for next year's parking. And there's no range, there's no choice. And I feel that we could offer a wider range of choices, that there could be a thing where you could park once a week in Dorchester and a thing where you can park 7 times a week in Dorchester, and variations. Make it look attractive, make the website look more attractive. It's better than most other councils. I looked at a few other councils, and ours is quite a nice site and quite easy to access. But it would be nice in all our output, especially on the internet, to actually invite people, say welcome to Dorchester and here are the car parks and please use them, because we don't want people parking all over the streets for free, basically. That's one of the cross subsidies, is that people who park on the street get a free service and the people who pay for car parks pay for the road to be put there. So that is a cross subsidy. I thought that was really Councillor Jesperson's point. So a wider range would give those people access. And also I wonder if we could, I know there's a phone number they can ring up, but in the back of my mind, if the people in the libraries could actually do some of this for people, where they really find it difficult to phone up and speak to a distant official, they don't know where they are or anything, if they could actually come into a centre where they can actually buy parking tickets and try and make that something, again, it could be an income-generating thing. So that's the variety of, so that they could actually afford to come into Dorset and shop and park and everything, and wouldn't be put off coming here altogether and go off to somewhere else. I think that the tourism is the other thing which I want to talk about. It says on the Dorset Council information site, £1 billion a year comes from tourism. And at half of this, that's £10 million a week, comes from day visitors. So we don't want to discourage them. But I think we should be making more effort to encourage them to make the parking site look welcome and give them a range of choices which they can pay into. Extra offers where they can park for, I don't know, make it for, if they're having a fortnight's holiday, you can actually get a slightly cheaper deal than if they go into each car park and pay separately. But just more like sort of Amazon rather than Dorset County Council. Yeah. So that's encourage people, sell it, and make it a really good sales site rather than a list of regulations about what you pay when you go to which car park. And the last thing is encouraging people not to use cash, because there are shops in Dorset that haven't accepted cash now for 2 or 3 years. And having parking machines full of money has led to all the problems we spoke about, I think, last week, where people are actually taking parking machines home with them. Is that true in Weymouth? They actually take the cash and the machine. The whole thing's disappeared. We order a new one, and of course it's not going to come for 6 months. And the question I get asked quite often by people, elderly people who haven't got a phone, is what happens if I can't pay by phone and I can't actually put the cash in the till? I still haven't had an answer to that one. They are quite upset because they're worried they're going to be prosecuted. But I think we should be pointing people in that direction, and I wonder if the charges could actually reflect a reduction for people who pay by phone or something like that. Some sort of mechanism to encourage cashless payments so that we don't have car parks full of gold, basically vulnerable cash. Oh, sorry.
I understand where you're coming from, but I don't actually think the policy is the right place for this, and I wonder whether perhaps there could be a separate piece of work done specifically to look at this area. Councillor Brooks, would you like to come in? Is this your area as a lead member? Oh, it's not. You're welcome to come in anyway. Come on in.
Thank you. Is that to respond to the issue of the car parks? Because I do have a... Yeah. Thank you. No, it was... I have got a question for Aidan. One of the reasons that the members asked for us to look to be more commercial was because we were not competitive. So I know that we're saying that we will charge at cost and then discount where reasonable. Have we looked at different models, and have we looked at the market rates and whether we're competitive in the services that we offer? Because in some areas we may be able to operate a model where the costs would come down if we did more, so stack them up and mark them down. And I just wondered whether that, as a commercial approach, was something that we'd looked at when we looked at the policy.
Thank you. Aidan, do you want to respond to Councillor Brooks, and then we'll just come back on Councillor Tarr? Thank you.
Thanks. I might be able to tie the two issues together. So I'll answer a slightly different question first. One of the things that we're able to do now that we've got our schedule of rates is to compare ourselves to other councils, which is a really helpful bit of benchmarking to highlight whether we're sort of completely out of alignment, either too high or too low. So that gives us a helpful comparison, and then for those areas we can start to really study them and work out if there is a difference, why, and do we want that difference to remain. But that's a slightly different issue between being competitive. It depends who we're being competitive with. So if we take, for example, the issue I mentioned earlier about providing payroll services to schools. So there are a number of private operators out there who charge a different price than we do. We have deliberately decided to keep our price lower than the market rate in order for the schools to have a straightforward relationship. Should they choose to, they still have the choice of buying from us, and if price is important. So that's one of the factors. So we do take into account competition, but it doesn't apply everywhere. There's not that many things that we can be competitive with the market. We touched on in scrutiny last week that some councils, in order to trade, have set up wholly owned companies, so arm's length companies, and they, under legislation, are able to make a profit. So they set up an arm's length company to be competitive. But then you have to ask ourselves the question as a council, do we want to be competitive with the local market and therefore at risk of putting a private company out of business? So, for example, some councils have set up the printing service, you know, the sort of do the printing of books and all that sort of thing. Do we want to be in that market and trying to win business at the price of a local trader? So that's a kind of it's a question that we haven't answered. We haven't set up an arm's length company to do that yet. So the competition is slightly sort of nuanced on that area. If we go back to the parking question, I think what the policy that we've got in front of us talks about is using price as a tool in a way. Some of it might be about competition. Some of it might be about rationing a scarce resource so that we put prices up in order to ration. Conversely, we want to keep prices competitive because if we put them up too high, you get fly parking, people parking in the wrong place. So it's really quite nuanced, which is why the policy isn't too prescriptive and it gives that room for manoeuvre. But I think as we mature in our commercial approach, we'll start to get into the areas of deciding whether we want to be competitive and what does competitive actually look like.
Building regs. Very competitive.
Thank you. Go on. I fully agree with the issue of competition against local businesses. We're there to support them, not to knock them out of business. But I'm thinking of things like the Green Space team, who have got a huge offer, a wide range of offerings that actually I don't think do compete very much with local business because there aren't that many local businesses that deal in those specialisms. But when they're giving quotes, I believe, and having had one myself for some work, they're not competitive. And so somewhere, it's because of the on-costs of the council, I know that, somewhere we need to take a view, do we want to be competitive without obviously causing damage to the market? And if so, what are we going to do to look at a model that will make it cost effective?
Aidan?
And that's a great example. I've had a similar experience with a tree falling over and getting a quote for it. One of the other things we have to ask ourselves as a council is, if we take, for example, the Green Space team, primarily we've got the team there to do work that the council needs to have done, and then it's about selling on spare capacity. So that's one issue, selling on spare capacity. If we're selling on spare capacity, what price should we do it at? On the other hand, if we're going deliberately down that strategy, we expand the team with a business case, a business plan, and deliberately and consciously decide to move into that market because we think we want to be competitive in there, it's an opportunity for us, or indeed there isn't sufficient supply in the market at the moment. So I think, and one of the examples we talked about at scrutiny last week as well, a theoretical example of taxi companies and home-to-school transport. So at the moment, there's relatively few taxi companies, and therefore home-to-school transport, they're able to charge us quite a high price. If we were to set up our own taxi company, it brings some competition into the market, which might drive the price down. So it's a degree of sophistication I don't think we're at yet. This policy gives us a good platform, a stepping stone for that.
I think we need to sort of bring this right back to this policy. I mean, we could talk about, if we went into every one of the 1,500 areas and asked, but what if, we would never get through it. And this gives us the framework with which to move on. Councillor Coombs, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chairman. Just pick up on that last comment and the Green Space team. For example, through planning and development of SANGs, we often take a commuted sum for the ongoing maintenance for that. So I can see the value in having something like this, because then we start to benchmark what should that actually look like, rather than an individual discussion per planning application or per section 106. So yeah, I get where he's coming with that, but what I really wanted to say was in response to Councillor Tarr, is we're looking at a framework of fees and charges. We're not looking at any individual service area. And if we started to unpick one service area, then why not do the rest? And I think it'd be far better having a conversation with Councillor Gibson, who is the lead member for highways and is covering car parking. And maybe when they do a review, that's the time to ask those questions, but not here this morning.
Exactly. Let's bring it back right down to this policy. Councillor Jesperson, is it specifically on this policy? I'm going to get strict now.
Specifically. Yes, before you close, there is just one thing I would like to flag up and a plea. Any discussion, even an excellent discussion like we've had this morning on fees and charges, causes a degree of anxiety with town and parish councils. So can we be very aware of that they have skin in this game, because they are quite often the people who are purchasing these services, the green space and so forth. So can we be really, really thoughtful about how we communicate the development of this policy and what it means for them, so that we don't set that the usual hair running about how we're going to be passing on charges to town and parish councils, which is absolutely not in any way the purpose of this policy, or has not been discussed here today at all, just for clarity. Thank you.
Very much. I'm sure that that can be sorted out. I just had one very quick question. When you're talking about recovering staffing costs, I remember looking at something we were doing through trading standards, and we were charging for like 20 minutes, and I just think that's impractical. How are you looking at charging in salary costs in terms of the time worked, and should it be taken to the nearest 30 minutes, the nearest hour, because we can't be charging 10 minutes and 20 minutes?
So we're line by line based approach. So one of the things we've been exploring is we can identify the costs associated with a piece of work, the direct costs of staffing. And frankly, as you say, going down to the nearest 20 minutes doesn't really work. So we're taking a proportionate approach there. The other question we've been thinking about is those fixed costs, the costs of running the council, the costs of this meeting. Do we come up with a standard apportionment saying, so it's so the variable cost plus 30% fixed the overheads? We've decided to go for a slightly more nuanced, sophisticated approach. So yes, there'll be an allocation of the costs of running the council, but each price area we will take into account the local circumstances as well. And some of the things we've explored today, library fines versus dropped curbs. How do you actually sort of link in staffing costs to that? So we do look at it on a case-by-case basis, and part of the spotlight we're shining on is trying to unpick how have we arrived at those prices in the first place. How have we arrived at those prices? How do they compare to other councils? How does it fit with our policy direction?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Alford, would you like to come back?
Yes, please. I'm sure you're looking for a decision on this very, very quickly. I start this thought by reminding you that pricing is just one element of the marketing mix. And I think the rest of the marketing mix does need to be taken into account very, very carefully. And if you think about the idea that there are people in this organisation who are the leaders of generating income for this council, whatever their job title is, that we need to, I believe, consult with them prior to each financial year or every time there is a proposed change to the price list, to obtain their understanding of what is proposed And really, it's just a form of consultation, because there could be leaders of services who will think to themselves, can I run a business if that is what I need to be charging? And I think of building regulation as an example of a service that is supplied in competition with the private sector. You can't disregard the pricing that other firms are adopting. So, we just need to think clever and recognise that there is more than pricing in terms of generating income for this council.
I think we've had a good thrashing at this. So if we wrap this up, are we okay to suggest that scrutiny take a look in a year's time, and particularly at areas that we've cross-subsidised, and to have a general look at it? And you're happy with everything that's been said and putting the notes in, and with lots of nuances and a bit of a holistic here and there? Yeah. All happy? Thank you. Moving on. Right, agenda item 8 is our forward plan. I have to say it's looking a little bit sparse. So I am wondering, at the last Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee, they looked at a monitoring report on assets, property strategies and asset plan, with an intention to develop a new strategic asset management plan. I think that was going through Peter Hopkins. I'm just wondering if we can turn that into something we take a look at, because there's an awful lot of work going on in assets. I don't feel in the slightest bit involved in it. And I just think as members, it would be very useful. I'm not quite sure how we do this, so I'm going to leave this with the lovely Lindsay to see whether we can draw that up into anything that could come back to overview. Councillor Coombs.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just looking at both our plan and the Cabinet Forward Plan. And Cabinet have a paper coming in January, Dorset Council Plan Priorities Update, Climate and Ecology, Assets and Property. So whether we can make a request that when Cabinet see that, have that, because it's an update report, that when they get that in January, that we have a request in there from us that there is some sort of way of increasing member involvement, wider member involvement in that, because we don't have our next meeting until February. So we cannot do anything in the interim, but if we can do it through that as the vehicle, I think that might help.
Are you happy to take that away, Lindsay? That's great. Councillor Jesperson.
Yes, I mean, I agree with you, Madam Chairman, that it's looking a little sparse. In addition to that one, I also looked, and I don't know, I'm again looking at the Cabinet Forward Plan. I don't know what the Housing for Local People report will be, but if that's talking about policy, which I suspect it will be, that's one that we probably should have a look at before it goes for cabinet. So could I just ask a question? Should that be coming here? And the other one, the Account and Digital Innovation paper, which is coming later on, is that something that should be coming here? It brings it just. I mean, I don't know what those papers on, but they look like our area. It brings me to the slightly more general question. You'll know, Madam Chairman, that in the LGA peer review of overview committees, one of the things that became clear was that the overview committees have not absolutely found their feet yet in terms of identifying work that should be coming to this committee before it goes anywhere else. We were quite clear by the end of that discussion about what our role is as a committee, but that hasn't necessarily filtered out into the wider process. So I think there's the fact that we've only got 2 things on our forward plan slightly supports that, and I think there is still more work to be done council-wide in understanding what the role of the overview committee is, because when we get here, we have such good discussions. I mean, today and all the work we did on 20 miles an hour, so we're clearly adding value. So I think there's a bit more work that needs to be done in understanding what should be coming here before it goes to Cabinet for us to work on. Thank you.
Okay, I'm happy to take that away. And on the Cabinet forward plan, I believed that we asked for the Household Recycling Centre for Eastern Area of Dorset to come back to this committee. I think it's just looking at this, it looks like it's just due to go straight for decision at Cabinet. Did we not ask that this come back here? Well, actually, I did. Yes, yeah, I asked that that item comes because there was a lot of feeling about that particular issue, and I followed it up afterwards and suggested that it could or it should come back here before a final decision is made. Could you take that forward, Lindsay? Is that all right? Anybody else for anything? Tony, you're looking really worried. Don't look worried. Spill it out.
I'm not looking worried. Just on that last point, being one of the members for the Eastern area, we do actually have a local member briefing in mid-December. So just to sort of add that into the mix.
So, well, look, based on that, do you want to advise whether you feel it should come back here or just go straight through to Cabinet?
I think it depends what's in the briefing.
Yeah. I said based on that, do you, well, let us know. Feed it back. Councillor Rowe.
Yeah, I think it depends on our discussion with local councillors, but also Gemma did say that she wanted it deferred. So I was quite surprised to see it's on 23rd of January. Doesn't really give very much time.
Yeah, she did say it could well be deferred. Let's just follow that one through. Okay, I don't think we can do much more on that one. So that's all noted. Urgent items, there are none. Exempt business, we have none. It looks like it is about 11 minutes past 11. Happy Thursday, we're done.
Thank you, Chairman.